So as the North American roster shuffle continues here at the end of 2015 to build lineups to start off the new year here in 2016, we have one of our only confirmed changes in order here with compLexity. Of course, there's been a lot of rumors going around about different lineups being built, and there was for sure a report that Alu was trialing for Liquid, that we don't know what has come of that, but we have one of our first confirmed reports of something that is for sure happening, and it is the changes that are taking place with compLexity going into the new year. So I thought I would talk about these changes a little bit, just address them, maybe analyze them a bit, and also talk a little bit about maybe the future of this team going forward now due to these changes. And so that's kind of the goal of this video. So obviously, the big change was that it was announced the night before I'm recording this video that fRoD would be coming back and joining the team. Then this morning when I woke up, there was another article out talking about how Simphis and Automatic had left the team, and that for now, at least, Rix and Sick would be coming in to fill those spots, in which case the lineup would be pretty much only Roka and Sanks remaining from the original lineup, and then fRoD, Sick, and Rix to round out the five. Though it did seem from the article that compLexity released today that Rix and Sick's spot weren't guaranteed. They were merely substitutes, and apparently the team was exploring potential other options to bring in maybe someone else, and that these guys were just stand-ins. But I'm sure that there is potential for these guys to become permanent fixtures on the team if it works out. You know, if the team is successful and they show that they are, you know, of value to compLexity, I'm sure there's a chance that they would be, you know, permanently placed on the roster. But for now, just temporary. So just going through these changes real quick, the first one to address is obviously fRoD. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about fRoD's history, and I think everyone knows who fRoD is and what he's been able to do. If you don't know much about fRoD because you're new to Counter-Strike and you just started, you know, watching when Go came out, and so you have no freaking clue who this fRoD guy is, then you should probably go check out some videos that Thorn recently released that do a much better job of explaining fRoD than I ever could. He released, I think, one the day that I'm recording this video that was like a Who is fRoD video on YouTube, so definitely go check that out. He also recently did a episode of Reflections where he interviewed fRoD pretty in-depth about pretty much his entire career. So, in fact, it was in that Reflections episode that Thorn released, I guess, a week or two before I made this video, where we first started hearing hints that fRoD wanted to come back into competitive CSGO. So it was kind of like a foreshadowing, so to speak, of this particular change with fRoD, you know, joining compLexity. So definitely check those videos out if you want to understand his history in 1.6 and maybe even a little bit of Counter-Strike Source and all that stuff. Now, I don't think Thorn really addressed much about fRoD's career in CSGO that he had, which I guess there really is no need to talk about it too much because it was very brief and it wasn't even like he took it that seriously, and no one really did. Basically, what took place is towards the middle of 2013, I guess, you know, starting like right before the summer of 2013 and leading up into, you know, the holidays. fRoD was a part of this lineup, which is basically old school players like Warden and Storm and fRoD, and then they had different players kind of cycle through, but the team that wound up actually going to the only LAN that fRoD's ever attended in CSGO was Dizaman and Applesauce. Now, the next season, like going into the more towards the end of 2013, fRoD also did play a bit online with this kind of same group of players, but Moses eventually kind of came into the fold, and that's whenever they kind of named themselves United 5. And I think, you know, XP3 eventually comes in to kind of replace fRoD actually for whenever they actually go to LAN and throughout the end of that online season. So basically, the only play that fRoD really had in CSGO was Season 14 of ESEA, which took place more towards the summer of 2013. Then he attended the Season 14 ESEA LAN in August of 2013. And then, like I said, he played a little bit of online CS for Season 15 of ESEA towards the end of the year, but never actually went with that team to LAN and you know, didn't stick with them for very long. So that's pretty much all we had in his CSGO career was that. And again, this team didn't really put in that much time. Most of them had full-time careers. You know, fRoD was in banking and Warden was a registered nurse, and, you know, Storm had whatever he was doing. I'm not really sure. So it was mostly guys who had full-time careers, working 9-to-5 jobs or maybe even longer than that. But they would come home and play some CS just to, you know, have fun together as a group. And they would try to compete a bit, but obviously didn't really put in that much time to practice or prep because they didn't have the time. It's mostly just about keeping with the game for a hobby almost, but they were still competing at a decent level. They were probably like a 5th or 6th place team in North America at the time. I mean, obviously you had teams out there like compLexity, and then to a degree Curse, and some of these other teams that were kind of considered the top, and eventually iBuyPower comes into the fold, and all those teams that you know of with that group of players. But they were still like a fifth, sixth team in North America. And fRoD looked pretty good in most of the online games that he played with this team. I mean, there was even some instances where they would upset a compLexity here and there in an online match for ESCA, and he would drop like a big number of frags in the high 20s or low 30s, and it would look really sick or whatever. But the only LAN that he actually ever played, they didn't do so hot. They got beat by compLexity, which is to be expected. compLexity was kind of one of the favorites at that event, and that was the compLexity that was still featuring like Simphis Hiko and Swag and Sean Garrison and Nothing. So that lineup that actually went on at the first major in 2013 to take that fourth place finish against by beating Astana Dragons. So, I mean, that was kind of known that they were going to probably lose this compLexity team, and they did. But then they also lost to this fRoD Gaming team, which was Freakazoid, Shazam, Mo, Easy PK, and then last minute they brought in Clown. And so this was a team that we thought that they would actually beat, but they wound up also getting 0-2'd here in a pretty one-sided fashion. So, yeah, I mean, there's not much to say about fRoD's CSGO career because it's pretty much been non-existent. He only played for a limited amount of time, and in that limited amount of time, he was only able to put in a limited amount of effort into actually trying to, do anything with CSGO. And I don't think they were even trying to do anything with CSGO. I mean, big money wasn't around then. It wasn't until probably a year later when names like Cloud9 started coming to the picture that teams were actually even starting to get salaried. So fRoD had every reason to leave the game, and so did many players because there just wasn't any money there. And these guys were, getting in their high 20s. They needed to find careers and a stable way of living, and so fRoD had to go and do that, and it's perfectly understandable. Now, obviously, there is a little bit more money involved in CSGO. In fact, a lot more money involved in CSGO, and it seems like more to come with bigger tournaments and TV leagues and all this good stuff, which might be like guaranteed salaries that can maybe somewhat compete with whatever fRoD was doing for a living prior to making his return to the game. And so I guess at the end of the day, there's really not much we can say about how fRoD's going to be for this team. I mean, I know that he has a great pedigree. He has a lot of experience. I mean, he is a guy that has, at times in his career in Counter-Strike as a whole, not Go, but in CS, has been a star player, a superstar player, one of the best in his position, and carried teams to victory several different times. And he's felt the pressure of being at the finals of a big event, where his back's up against the wall and he's up against a team that's favored or what have you. Like he's lived through these situations for years, and so the amount of experience he can bring to the table as far as keeping his composure and developing new talent and helping them kind of, as they're just getting started in their careers. He's been there, he's done that. He can certainly relate to them and maybe help kind of coach them through and be a leader. I mean, he definitely has a lot of positives he can bring to the table as far as experience and knowledge and attitude goes. I mean, he has the drive to win. He has that attitude, he has that discipline, he has the dedication to put in the time to be good. So I have no doubt that fRoD will put in the hours to try to be the best player that he can be. I'm sure he'll sit there and grind out hours of death matching, and he'll watch games, he'll review demos, he'll put in the time to do the research and to be the best player that he can possibly become. So I think that that's already good news, that you're going to have a guy who is dedicated, who is willing to put in the time to better himself as a player, as well as try to better his team and try his best to find a way to win. So that's all good and all. But can he actually be a skilled opper? Like, again, can he actually be competing with names within the North American region like a JDM or a Skadoodle, or since Fallen competes in the NA region, can he compete with those? And then past that, will he ever be up there with like a Guardian or a Kenny S or some of these other really big names out there on Fnatic and such? It's really hard to say, obviously. All we can really do is speculate. But I know he'll put in the time to try to be that good, but if he'll ever reach there or not is a completely different question that isn't really answerable. So I guess we'll just have to kind of sit back and wait and see what he's going to be able to bring to the game, but we at least know that he's going to have the right mindset and he's going to add a lot of value as a leader for this team. And I'll just kind of have to leave it at that, because until I watch him play some games and see what he can do, there's not much else you can draw from it. So next, we'll talk about the other additions to the team really quick. So Rix is going to be one of the additions to the team, at least on a temporary basis. Now, Rix really didn't make a name for himself in CSGO too much until probably his stint with Tempo Storm. which was more towards, I guess, the beginning to the middle of this year of 2015, where he played like the CEVO Season 7 finals with that team, where they had some good games against Virtus Pro, where they lost that series 0-2, but they had like this really close game on Cash where they lost 13-16, which was kind of unheard of because VP were like gods on Cash, and his team wasn't really even on anyone's radar at the time. And so that was like a really big game, and he had like a really crazy game on Cash against Virtus Pro, put up some really good numbers, looked very impressive. He also beat up on what is, I guess, now considered Winter Fox, though a lot of the players aren't the same. I think like Lex and Anger might be some of the only players that are still left on the lineup whenever they beat him here. And they were still called Luminosity at the time, before Luminosity picked up the Brazilians. And they knocked them out of the tournament. Then they went on to play Navi in the decider match for that group to advance to the top four. And they lost to Navi, but they actually took a map off of him. They beat him in double overtime on Mirage. Inferno. They had a close loss on Mirage, 13-16, and then they kind of lost in the map 3 on Kabul in a pretty one-sided fashion. So, he put up a good performance at this event. He looked very impressive. A lot of people were, taken back by the team's performance as a whole, since Tempo Storm wasn't expected to do much. But at the same time, they also really took away from this that Rix, put up a solid performance. He then went on to play in the Cologne qualifiers in August, and his team lost to Liquid in the group stage of this Cologne qualifier for North America. But he's still one of the top fraggers for the team despite losing to Liquid, so still looked pretty decent. But I guess overall the team really played average in comparison to the big performance they had at the CEVO event just the weekend prior in late July. Then he was playing with the Conquest lineup, today, through much of August, September, and October of this year, and he looked really good in all their online games. But he was let go from the team when they picked up Stanislaw, and apparently there was a lot of drama about, personality conflicts and issues, and Rix had some words to say about getting removed from the team, and it was certainly a lot of drama. It was certainly an issue there. So I know also after all this happened, he was trying out, I think, a bit for the current Winter Fox team, but for whatever reason, either he didn't want to join them or they didn't want him. I'm not sure which it was, but I know he did try for them, but that didn't happen. And so he's been just kind of sitting around for the last couple of months since being removed from Conquest in October, and he's just been kind of, I guess, waiting for an opportunity, and here it is for compLexity. So what are some of the pros and cons for Rix? What can he bring to the table? What are some drawbacks? Well, for one, he has been a great aggressive rifler in his time with Tempo Storm and in Conquest, though most of it was online play, of course. Still looked really good, though, and had some good performances on LAN. He was the primary entry fragger for Tempo Storm for the most part, where he had that good performance at the CEVO event against Navi and Virtus Pro. When he was playing for Conquest, he was more of a secondary entry fragger because Rush kind of took the primary role, so he was like more of the trade fragger or the second guy in. Played that role really well also. So I think that he's a skilled rifler that can certainly serve a role on this compLexity team as either an entry fragger or a secondary entry fragger. So yeah, he's going to be able to put up numbers. He's got the skill. Some of the cons might be still some inexperience. He hasn't been to very many lands. He hasn't played at a super high level for a long time. He was mostly playing in ESEA main or Premier and some of the semi-pro divisions for most of his CSGO career, and has only been playing at the pro level, I guess, for maybe a year or a little less than a year, like through most of 2015 when he started playing with the Tempo Storm guys. So there is some inexperience there. So I also know that at times he was known to be a bit too aggressive, maybe, try to push the issue a bit too much, so that there might be some decision-making things that might need to kind of get worked out a bit, though I'm sure with proper coaching and such, he could certainly be developed in that regard. Some other cons might be his attitude. I know at times he's gotten into some skirmishes with people online on different forums and social media and things like that. So for a professional organization like compLexity, I'm sure they're going to have to try to keep that in check, and I'm sure they'll talk with him about it. Obviously Cloud9 kind of turned Shazam around for a little bit there whenever he was representing that organization, that he was a lot better about being outspoken online. And so maybe Rix can, be coached the same way with compLexity to not be that way. But I know that he has gotten into a little bit of trouble here and there for his attitude, but he still can be valuable as a entry fragger or a skilled rifle on this team in general. So then the next person that joined the team is going to be Sick. Now, there's not too much to talk about with Sick. He's a very inexperienced player. He's only 17 years old. He only started competing in CSGO period, like back in January of 2015, and he didn't really start playing at a pro level until probably 6 months ago or something like that. So a very, very young, raw talent that doesn't have very much experience. He's never been to LAN, I don't think. There's not a lot there. He did play with Denial. That's where he would be known from. And he played with that core lineup like back when they were called Mortality, and then they were called Trifecta. Now they are called Denial. He played with that same group of players pretty much his entire career, like from Open and ESCA until they got promoted to the Premier Division where they were just recently. He was their top fragger and stats leader through most of their games for this last season of ESCA Premier, and in the playoffs, where, of course, they won Premier, but they lost to Winter Fox in a relegation match, and so they didn't get promoted to Pro, and the team kind of fizzled out because of it. Not going to get into that whole drama. He also played in the CEVO Pro League last season, Season 8, with this same group of players that, like I said, called Mortality at one point, Trifecta, then Denial. And he looked quite good. They even had some wins against compLexity. They had some ties versus Luminosity and CLG. So, I mean, they were an underdog team that managed to put up some good map results at times. And when they were putting up those wins, Sick was a big part of it, putting up good numbers. He served on this team as a more aggressive rifler, as either an entry fragger or secondary entry fragger. I think it was like Sick and Vice were kind of the entry duo for this team, where they had like someone like fRoD or whatever being more of like a lurk role, and Shinobi kind of being more of a peripheral player, and then Whitmer was, of course, their opper. So Sick was very much a part of kind of the more aggressive rifler role on the team as an entry force, and so I don't know if he'll carry over that role or not with this team, but he certainly could. So when you think about this, the ideal roles for this team would be something like fRoD opping, obviously, Rix and Sick being some type of entry duo. Then you have Roka, who has pretty much his entire career played a peripheral role on maps. Like, he's been upper B on Mirage when he, like, pretty much his whole career with Elevate, and most of his career in general CSGO, he's played like upper B on Mirage by himself, or played, Squeaky Door on Cash is a position he's very much known for, which is a kind of a peripheral solo role. He plays a lot of long A on Dust 2, another, peripheral solo type role that he's very much known for in the NA scene. So he is very much kind of an aggressive lurker. I know people kind of slot him as an entry fragger, but I've never really thought of him that way. He's more of an aggressive, he's a more aggressive lurker, but he's kind of played more of a peripheral role. So I think you could still slot him that way while you have, so maybe if you're doing like a 1-3-1 default, you'd have, your op, fRoD, Rix, and Sick kind of traveling together as a pack of three, and then you might have Sanks playing one peripheral role while Roka plays the other. Something like that might be the ideal roles for this team. But I also know that when Sanks has put up his best numbers, it's been when he's been more of an entry fragger. So I don't know if this means that like Rix or Sick might get slotted in a different position than what they've played in the past, where they might be more of a role in the periphery of the map, while it might be like Sanks, fRoD, and one of the two between Rix and Sick taking more entry frag positions. I'm not really sure how they're going to structure it. What I will say is who is going to lead this team is my big question, because there's no one on this team as far as a player role goes that has ever really done any in-game leading that I'm aware of. I know Sick surely hasn't. Shinobi was pretty much always leading the team that Sick was playing with over at Denial. I guess Rix has done some leading at times, but ever since he's been on like a pro team, it has been someone else leading the team. Back when he was playing with Daps, it was Daps. I guess that was pretty much the main person he played with on Conquest and Tempo Storm that would be leading. Well, no, it was Stanislaw and Tempo Storm. So either way, he's never really been a leader that I know of on a pro team. So you got to wonder about that. Sanks never really been a leading role either. I just don't know who would be the actual lead on this team. Roka surely hasn't been an in-game leader at any point in his career either. So that is certainly something I'm a bit concerned about, who's actually going to be the leader of this team. It is certainly possible that they could rely on a coach to be the in-game leader of a team like this. They currently do have a coach. This is Warden, who certainly could be capable of fulfilling that role as far as the knowledge and skills that he has. But does he really have the time? Is the big question. I know he recently got married, if I'm not mistaken. I know that he also has a full-time job as a nurse, if I'm not mistaken on that. So how is he going to find the time to be like a full-time coach, in-game leader for this team? He certainly could still have value as like some type of coach for this team. I'm sure he could still find time to look at demos or something with the team, and he could probably travel to some events with the team and stand behind them and do some coaching. I know he did do that for teams like Tempo Storm, and already has done that with, you know, the older roster of compLexity before this move. But he only has so much vacation time and time off that he can take to be traveling to events and to be, you know, working with the team on a regular basis. So I almost wonder if they would need some other type of coach to come in, or if Warren can somehow find the time. I don't know if he would actually quit his job to do this full time or not, but it seems like there might be some issues with who could lead this team. Maybe one of them will step up to the plate and try in-game leading, and it'll work out. I'm not really sure. I just know that none of these guys really have a track record of leading that I'm aware of. When it comes to calling the shots and calling the tactics. I know fRoD can be a leader and like kind of, you know, rallying the troops and keeping people in line and things of that nature, but actually calling the tactics is a different story. So I'm kind of curious to see what will happen there. As far as what this team can accomplish, I mean, compLexity has been kind of sitting at a 5th, 6th place team most of this year. You know, they were on the bubble of kind of qualifying for an ESEA and they were like right outside the top 4. So, I mean, they're in a decent spot to be able to accelerate themselves into a higher position in the North American rankings and be a playoff contender in some of these pro leagues. And they probably have a really good chance to be involved in the Turner League, which will be, of course, another big league with a lot of money involved. So they certainly are sitting in a decent position. They're not known as the cream of the crop of North America, but they certainly aren't the bottom of the barrel either, and they ride just above the middle of the pack. So, I mean, they could maybe jump up a little bit. Maybe these hits take them down. I'm not really sure. It just depends on how these guys can perform. Can fRoD really become a great opera again? If so, this team could have a lot of value. You know, if Ricks can kind of continue some of the performances we saw with Tempo Storm and you know, Conquest, he could certainly be a good fragger for this team. Roka's already proven that he can be quite a good player and maybe even a star player for this team. Sick, very young guy, very much a gamble to see what he's going to be able to do. But if he winds up, you know, living up to the hype a little bit and stepping up and being like this new prodigy for NA, since he is like a really young guy, kind of like a Liege, maybe even a little bit younger than a Liege. You know, there is some things there that if it works out, like if everything clicks, then this team could be quite good. But even if they just have a couple of things click, they could still be a good team. So yeah, we'll just have to kind of sit back and see on what this team is going to do. But it certainly is an interesting roster, and quite honestly, it's one of the better lineup changes I've seen. If some of these rumors are actually true, this might actually be one of the better rosters that takes place in NA. So really cool stuff. Just wanted to do a quick video to talk about the changes Cole are going through and what it might mean. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Follow and subscribe for more. Thanks a lot.